Helen's own son chuckled as his wife whispered, "She's almost done anyway." By the time Aaron realized what he lost, Helen had already vanished and taken everything with her. Their inheritance, gone, their access, blocked, their future, sold to the highest bidder. They thought they were waiting for Helen's ending, but it was only the beginning of theirs. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The clinking of silverware masked the whisper that sliced deeper than any scream. Helen stood by the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on a towel, when the words floated through the air. Too casual, too cruel to be imagined. "She's almost done anyway," Mia said with a soft, bitter laugh. The words were sharp, thrown lightly like confetti at a funeral no one wanted to attend. Aaron didn't correct her. He didn't even flinch. He just sipped his wine, gaze fixed somewhere far beyond his mother's line of sight. Helen's fingers stiffened around the dish towel. For a moment, the room blurred, the cheerful clatter of plates, the golden glow of fairy lights draped across the living room. It all twisted into a hollow stage set. She swallowed once, then again, the lump of disbelief lodging itself deeper with every beat of her heart. Aaron had been her world once, the tiny, colicky baby she had rocked for endless nights, the little boy who had cried when he scraped his knees and whispered, "Don't ever leave me, Mama." The teenager she had forgiven too easily, the young man she had sold her wedding rings for, just so he could finish college after losing his scholarship. And now here he was, sitting with his wife, letting her mock the very woman who had traded dreams for diapers, vacations for tuition, youth for unconditional love. Helen steadied herself against the counter. She smiled faintly, not because anything was funny, but because anger, she had learned, was a currency best spent carefully. Their laughter rolled on behind her as she quietly excused herself. The hallway to her bedroom felt longer than usual, lined with photographs. Aaron's first steps, high school graduation, the day he moved into his first apartment. Smiles she had protected for decades, now mocking her with silent betrayal. Inside her bedroom, Helen closed the door softly, not slamming it, not making a scene. Silence, she realized, was sharper than any slammed door. She knelt down stiffly, the familiar creak of her knees a reminder of years that had been lived too much in service to others. From under her bed, she pulled out an old cedar lockbox, scuffed, heavy, smelling faintly of dust and time. The combination lock spun easily under her practiced fingers. Inside, deeds, old savings bonds, insurance papers, and one battered, yellowing envelope. Helen traced the corner of the envelope with a fingertip, her heart suddenly steady. It wasn't money inside. It wasn't revenge. It was leverage. It was power. It was a map out of the oblivion Mia clearly thought Helen should step into without resistance. Helen lifted the envelope, the paper whispering against her skin like a ghost stirring awake. She hadn't looked at it in years, had almost forgotten its existence, but now, holding it under the dim glow of her bedside lamp, she realized it was the weapon they hadn't counted on. She smiled again. This time, the smile didn't tremble. Standing slowly, she walked over to the window, where the faint hum of their laughter still seeped through the house like smoke from a fire she no longer intended to put out. The stars stretched wide above her, limitless, unjudging. Helen clutched the envelope close to her chest and whispered, steady and clear, "Game on." And in that moment, it wasn't Helen's age that defined her. It wasn't the ache in her joints or the lines around her eyes. It was the sharp, unstoppable clarity of a woman who had nothing left to lose, and therefore everything to gain. Helen turned toward her desk drawer, ready to awaken the sleeping dragon they thought had already gone quiet. It wasn't the pictures disappearing from the walls that broke her. It was the way no one noticed they were missing. Helen sat silently at the kitchen table, a lukewarm cup of tea cradled between her hands as Mia marched past, arms full of fabric swatches and Pinterest boards on her phone. "We need a fresher vibe," Mia chirped, half to herself, half to Aaron, who trailed behind her like an obedient shadow. "This whole grandma aesthetic is so dated. Sage green and mauve? Seriously?" Aaron chuckled lightly, stuffing his hands in his pockets. "She does love her florals," he said, not looking at his mother. Helen felt her chest tighten, a dull ache blooming where pride used to live. This house, her house, had been her life's canvas, every corner handpicked, every vase placed after 1,000 second guesses. It wasn't just decor they were erasing, it was her. She glanced around. The antique sideboard from her wedding registry? Covered with trendy minimalist trinkets, the heirloom quilt her grandmother had sewn, folded hastily, shoved into a donations pile without a second glance. Even the scent of the house was changing, once cozy with lavender and baked bread, now overtaken by sharp citrus cleaning sprays Mia ordered online. Helen said nothing. Saying anything would only invite condescension. Instead, she rose quietly, each step through her own home feeling less like ownership, more like trespassing. She passed the family room and paused. A flashback seized her. The day she sold her last remaining family heirloom, an emerald brooch, just to cover Aaron's second semester tuition. He had promised her back then, with tears glistening in his eyes. "One day I'll buy you 100 brooches, Mom. You'll see." That promise had dissolved like sugar in water. Sweet, and then nothing. Mia's voice pierced the memory. "Aaron, can we just move her room to the back? It'll be easier if she's, tucked away when guests come over." Her tone was syrupy, but the knife underneath gleamed. Helen's grip tightened on the banister. Not anger, clarity. She turned on her heel and padded quietly to her bedroom. Underneath her bed, wrapped in old sweaters, was the small recording device she had ordered online months ago. Just in case. Just in case respect wasn't the shield it should have been. She activated it and tucked it into the pocket of her cardigan, her movements slow but deliberate. Today she would record. Tomorrow she would remember. Back in the hallway, she sat, sewing a loose button onto her sweater, as if she hadn't heard a thing. The world moved around her, impatient and entitled. Mia barked orders about curtain rods and open floor plans. Aaron laughed, a sound Helen didn't recognize anymore. And then came the jackpot. As Mia flipped through swatches, she muttered under her breath, not realizing Helen sat just feet away. "Can't believe we still have to tiptoe around her feelings. Honestly, if she kicks the bucket soon, it'll be the best thing that ever happened to us." The needle in Helen's hand paused mid-stitch, but she didn't look up, didn't flinch. The recorder hummed silently in her pocket, capturing every vile syllable. Later that night, when the house finally settled into uneasy silence, Helen sat cross-legged on her bed with her laptop. She transferred the recordings carefully, securely, created a private cloud folder, password protected, labeled it simply, Truth. As the progress bar inched across the screen, Helen leaned back against her headboard, staring up at the ceiling fans spinning lazy circles above her. They thought they were clearing space for a future she would never see. They didn't realize she was making space too, but for something else entirely. Helen clicked upload, a quiet smile touching her lips, and whispered into the dark, "Let's see how fresh the air feels when the walls start falling in." They thought she was waiting for the clock to run out. She was actually winding it tighter behind their backs. Helen sat at the far corner of a cozy, sunlit cafe, her hands folded neatly on the table, a calm mask stretched over a storming heart. She watched the door, heartbeat steady, waiting for a face from her past, but a future she was now betting on. The bell above the door jingled. In walked Nathan Parker, Mrs. Parker's boy, grown from a scrappy teenager into a sharply dressed man in his early 30s, carrying the weight of courtroom wars in his tailored navy suit. "Mrs. Collins?" he greeted warmly, sliding into the booth across from her, setting down a thick leather briefcase. "Or do you prefer Helen now?" She smiled, a small, reserved thing. "Today," she said, "let's stick to Helen. Tomorrow's paperwork might say otherwise." Nathan raised an eyebrow but said nothing, letting her guide the conversation. She pulled a battered envelope from her purse, the one she'd whispered "game on" to just nights ago, and pushed it across the table. Deeds, titles, old trusts, everything tied to the house. And to them. Nathan opened the envelope carefully, his lawyer hands gentle but swift, eyes scanning. A low whistle escaped him after a minute. "You still own it outright," he murmured, tapping a page with a ringed finger. "No liens, no co-signers, full, unchallenged ownership." Helen allowed herself a small exhale. The trapdoor hadn't been sprung prematurely. "And," Nathan added, flipping another page, "this clause here, survivorship exception. Smart move. It means if you transfer the property now into a living trust, they can't challenge it, even if you pass later." Helen's fingers twitched slightly on the tabletop, not from weakness, but from rising adrenaline. "They thought they were waiting me out," she said, voice low. "But time isn't running out for me. It's running out for them." Nathan smiled, not pitying, not patronizing, but impressed. "Tell me what you want," he said. "Quiet fade-out? Or fireworks?" Helen looked past him, out the wide glass window where the world buzzed forward. Buses, mothers pushing strollers, teenagers on scooters. She remembered Aaron at 7 years old, dragging a kite bigger than him across the park. How he'd cried when it tore, and how she stayed up half the night sewing it back together. She remembered Aaron at 22, hugging her at graduation, whispering, "I'll take care of you someday, Mom." She remembered the silence when she called him 3 years ago, scared and breathless, needing a ride to the hospital. The call had gone to voicemail. Helen turned back to Nathan, steel flooding her veins. "Spectacular," she said simply. Nathan nodded, his face sharpening. He pulled out a yellow legal pad. "We'll establish a blind trust for the property. Move liquid assets into protected accounts, lock everything down so airtight they'd need a crowbar and divine intervention to get in." He flipped a page. "And we pre-file property release triggers. If you relocate, vacation, anything, they still get no access without your explicit signature." Helen felt something inside her loosen, not grief, not bitterness, something quieter, something like liberation. Nathan leaned in, lowering his voice like a magician revealing a final trick. "And if we play this just right, we can time it so by the time they realize what's happening, it'll be too late for them to undo any of it." Helen smiled, not the warm, motherly one Mia mocked, not the tired one Aaron ignored. A new smile, one sharpened by betrayal and cooled by clarity. "I don't need revenge," Helen said. "I just need peace." Nathan closed his notebook with a satisfying snap. "Then peace, Mrs. Collins, is exactly what they're about to lose." He reached into his briefcase and slid a folder across the table. Inside were templates, deeds, outlines for new trusts, and plans detailed enough to make an empire tremble. Helen placed her hand on the folder, claiming it without hesitation. Across from her, Nathan chuckled under his breath. "You always were the smartest woman on the block," he said. "Pity your son forgot." Nathan leaned in, his voice almost conspiratorial, and said with a glint in his eye, "We can end this quietly, or spectacularly. Your move, Helen. Sometimes the deepest cuts don't bleed right away. Sometimes they're made by paper, one silent slice at a time." Helen sat quietly at her dining room table, the same table she once polished for Aaron's 3rd birthday, now littered with neatly stacked documents. The only sound was the soft scratch of her pen signing away little pieces of what Mia thought would one day be hers. The lamp above her cast a pool of warm light, but Helen felt a coolness under her skin, a thrill she hadn't felt in years. Control, precision, power that didn't come from shouting, but from knowing exactly where to pull the thread. Across the hallway, laughter floated in from the living room. Mia was redecorating again, bright cushions, loud abstract paintings, trendy throw rugs that clashed violently with the home's original character. "New beginnings," Mia chirped to Aaron, who grunted from behind his phone. Helen heard every word, every future plan that didn't have her in it. Let them dream, she thought, sliding the first property transfer sheet into a blue folder. One signature, one witness, and another root severed without them even smelling the smoke. Later that afternoon, Helen wandered into the kitchen, deliberately leaving the fridge door open just a crack, forgetting to turn off the coffee pot. Mia noticed, of course. She always did now. "Mom," she said sweetly but loudly. Maybe you need to start writing things down. It's totally normal at your age. Her smile was tight, victorious. Helen blinked innocently. I suppose you're right, dear, she murmured, jotting down a fake reminder on a post-it, in neat, sharp handwriting. By evening, Helen met Nathan again at the cafe. The air smelled of cinnamon and fresh paper, a strange comfort. You're doing it perfectly, Nathan said approvingly, tapping the trust documents she'd brought back. Slow cuts. They'll never feel the bleeding until it's too late. Helen nodded. I don't want a war, she said. I want a surrender they never even notice until they're already out the door. Nathan grinned and handed her another file, thicker, heavier. Here's the next move, he said. Open a secret escrow account. Quietly start moving assets there. No alarms, no alerts. Invisible until they're officially locked out. Helen's hands didn't shake as she took the papers. She thought they might. She thought she might cry. But she didn't, because it didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like survival. When she got home that night, Helen passed Mia sitting cross-legged on the couch, catalog browsing on her tablet. I was thinking, Mia said without looking up, once we renovate the kitchen, we should knock out that weird sunroom. It's so old-fashioned. Helen paused, her hand on the banister. The sunroom. The room her husband built with his own 2 hands the year Aaron was born. The room where Aaron took his first wobbly steps toward her, giggling and drooling. Helen smiled. A slow, icy thing. That sounds lovely, Mia, she said. Lovely indeed. In her room, Helen locked the door, booted up her old laptop, and signed the final authorization for the escrow account. Her assets, the house, the bonds, the retirement savings, slid quietly, invisibly, into the new trust. No alarms, no blinking notifications, only the sound of a gentle click as she closed the laptop lid. Downstairs, Mia and Aaron argued lightly about backsplash tiles, oblivious to the ground shifting under them. The next morning, a plain envelope arrived at Nathan's office, stamped and certified. Helen's first major property, the very house Mia was already redesigning in her mind, was officially moved out of Helen's direct personal name and into an untouchable trust. Helen tucked a fresh orchid into the sunroom vase, humming softly as the morning sun streamed in. In her chest, something light flickered. Not fear, freedom. And they didn't even know they were already trespassing. Sometimes the end doesn't come with a bang. Sometimes it comes with the slow, careful clatter of silverware on fine china. Helen smoothed the front of her deep emerald sweater and glanced once around the dining room. The table gleamed under the chandelier's soft light, laden with the feast she had prepared: turkey, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, recipes passed down through generations. The scent of cinnamon, roasting meat, and butter filled the air. A scene so warm, so familiar, yet the chill under Helen's skin would not thaw. Mia, seated confidently at the head of the table now, flashed a brittle smile as she sliced into her turkey breast. Her laughter, just a shade too loud, bounced off the high ceilings. You know, Mia said, dabbing the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin, maybe next year it'll just be our house. Easier, you know, one kitchen to worry about. Aaron chuckled nervously, not meeting Helen's gaze. The words landed with the softness of a velvet dagger. Helen gripped the stem of her wineglass, the coolness of the crystal grounding her. She didn't flinch. She didn't frown. She smiled, sweetly, politely, the way women of her generation were trained to. Maybe sooner than you think, dear, she said, her voice warm as honey. Mia blinked, confused, but shrugged it off with another giggle, tossing her manicured hair back. The dinner dragged on, a slow-motion train wreck Helen no longer felt trapped inside. She floated above it, detached. She caught snippets of Mia boasting about renovation plans, Aaron mumbling about making things modern. Their words clattered against Helen's ears, meaningless now. Because while they dreamed aloud, Helen's real plans were already cementing into action. After dessert, an apple pie Helen had baked herself, smiling through the tightness in her chest, Helen excused herself quietly. She climbed the stairs slowly, one hand trailing along the familiar oak banister, her heart pounding a steady rhythm. In her bedroom, she sat at her desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out the folder Nathan had prepared. Every document, every signature, every notarized seal. The final steps that made the house unclaimable, untouchable. Mia could hang whatever curtains she liked. It wouldn't be hers. Not now. Not ever. Helen uncapped her fountain pen, the same one her husband once used to sign the mortgage papers decades ago, and pressed it to the page. One signature, another. And just like that, the house was transferred fully and irrevocably into a trust no court could contest. No familial right, no inheritance claims, no loopholes. She slipped the papers into a prepaid overnight envelope, sealed it with a firm swipe, and placed it in her leather satchel. Tomorrow she would mail it first thing. Tomorrow the future they thought they owned would crumble under their feet. Back downstairs, she refilled her wine glass, savoring the rich scent of berries and oak. She leaned casually in the doorway, watching Mia recount plans for a kitchen remodel that would never happen. Helen sipped slowly. Cheers to that. Later that night, when the house finally fell silent, save for the ticking grandfather clock and the occasional pop of settling wood, Helen sat by the fireplace. Her laptop glowed softly in the dark room. She opened her email, one unread message from the airline. Subject, flight confirmation, departure, December 26th, non-refundable. She hovered over the keyboard, her fingers steady, her heart oddly light. This wasn't an ending. This was a beginning she was choosing. For once, not staying out of duty or guilt or faded promises. Helen clicked, confirm. The screen refreshed. Her ticket was booked. Her freedom sealed. She leaned back in the armchair, took one last sip of her wine, and whispered into the quiet, "Merry Christmas to me." From upstairs, a soft ping echoed from Helen's phone. She rose, graceful and unhurried, and smiled as she read the screen. "Your boarding pass is ready." Tomorrow the house would still smell of turkey and cinnamon. But Helen would already be gone. The world was still dark when Helen zipped up her suitcase, the small wheels barely whispering across the hardwood floor. Not even the grandfather clock had chimed yet. No goodbyes, no second guesses. At the front door, she paused, not to look back, but to breathe in one last quiet lungful of the house she had built with dreams and sacrifices. The faint scent of yesterday's pine garland still lingered, sweet and sharp. In her coat pocket, her boarding pass was a thin, powerful slip of paper, the real Christmas gift she had given herself. Helen pulled the door closed behind her without a sound. The click of the latch felt more final than any argument could have. The Uber driver, a sleepy college kid, barely said a word as she slid into the back seat. The streets stretched ahead, empty, the streetlights casting long ribbons of light across the road. Helen watched the familiar landmarks blur past. The bakery where Aaron had once pulled her by the hand to buy warm chocolate croissants, the old library she used to take him to after school. None of it hurt now. It simply was. A city she had served, a life she had given. And now she chose to leave before it stole anything more. At the airport, Helen moved like a shadow, early boarding pass in hand, no checked luggage to slow her down. Security barely glanced at her. To them, she was just another grandmother visiting family. To herself, she was a storm slipping through the cracks. At the gate, she found a quiet corner, pulled out a simple postcard she had tucked into her purse, and scribbled a few words with her blue fountain pen. "Don't wait up," signed only with a small heart and the letter H. She addressed it to Aaron and dropped it into the mailbox near the Hudson newsstand. By the time they received it, she'd be long gone. When her flight number was called, Helen stood, gathered her things, and boarded with the slow, deliberate calm of a woman nobody thought twice about. She took her window seat, fastened her belt, and leaned her head back as the engines hummed to life. Outside the small oval window, the first hints of dawn bled into the night sky, a muted purple streak surrendering to inevitable light. Helen smiled to herself. They left the door open. She left the state. The villa was even more beautiful than the online photos had promised. Nestled along a quiet lake in a senior resort where privacy was sacred and residents chose new beginnings over old battles, it was perfect. Helen checked in under the pseudonym she and Nathan, her lawyer, had agreed on. Eleanor Hart. A name with no ties, no trails, no open windows. The villa itself smelled faintly of fresh paint and lavender oil. The wide windows welcomed the breeze from the lake, and Helen spent her first afternoon simply standing barefoot on the deck, sipping tea, watching the world breathe without her needing to hold it together anymore. Back at her old house, the dominoes began to fall. Nathan triggered the automatic activation of the hidden trust and sent out the scheduled notices Helen had prepared. The property was no longer linked to any accessible family name. The accounts, once so easy for Aaron and Mia to dream about, were suddenly invisible. Frozen. When Mia picked up her phone later that afternoon to check the linked balance, her shriek could have cracked glass. "What the hell?" she screamed, jabbing at the screen. "It's empty! It says no access! Aaron, call her!" Aaron, pale and shaky, fumbled with his phone and dialed Helen's number. The line rang once, twice, and then, "This number has been disconnected. No further information is available." Panic slammed into him like a freight train. He looked at Mia, who was already spiraling. "You said she was just old. You said she didn't have time." Mia hissed, hands shaking. Aaron didn't answer, because for the first time, he understood something chilling. Helen hadn't run out of time. They had. Aaron stormed to the laptop, desperately trying to access the joint banking logins. His hands froze midair. Access denied. A simple message blinked back at him. "Account owner change in progress. Please contact your trust administrator." Aaron turned pale as a ghost. It started with a single click. Mia tapped the banking app icon with a manic finger, her nails chipped from nervous chewing all morning. She stared at the spinning wheel on the screen. Loading. Loading. Still loading. Then, error. Account not found. Her breath hitched, rattling in her chest. She tried again. And again. Different accounts. Different banks. All gone. Every number that had once promised vacations, new cars, a future dripping in luxury, vanished like smoke. "What the hell?" she screeched, slamming the phone down on the marble countertop hard enough to make the coffee cups rattle. Aaron stumbled into the kitchen, his face blotchy and sleepless. "What? What now?" Mia shoved the phone at him, her hand trembling. "Check yours. Now." Fumbling with clumsy fingers, Aaron opened his own banking apps. Same error. Same cold emptiness staring back. The inheritance they had whispered about, schemed over, waited for with smug patience, was gone. Aaron's mind raced. He remembered Helen's muttered jokes about tidying up, and the suspicious way she had smiled when Mia brought up decorating the living room for their future kids. He felt a cold pit open in his gut. He grabbed the landline, an old relic Helen had insisted on keeping, and punched in the financial advisor's number Helen used to mention, straight to voicemail. Not just any voicemail, a new voice, cool and clipped, stating simply, "This number is no longer associated with your account. Please contact the trust administrator with proper credentials." Trust administrator? Aaron wiped a sweaty hand down his face. There had never been talk of a trust before, at least not one they knew about. Before panic could completely paralyze him, the doorbell rang. Hard, urgent. Aaron and Mia exchanged a glance before he staggered to open it. Standing on the porch was a sharply dressed woman in a tailored black suit, holding a thick envelope. "Mr. Aaron?" she asked, flipping through a clipboard. "Yes? This is for you. Official notice." She handed over the envelope and left without another word. Aaron tore it open. Inside was a single-page letter from Helen's lawyer, typed in crisp, brutal black ink. As of date, all properties, financial accounts, and assets once linked to Helen Whitmore have been irrevocably transferred to private trust ownership. No familial claims will be recognized now or in the future. Attempted claims will be considered harassment and legally actionable. Nathan Cole, Esquire. Aaron's knees buckled slightly. He leaned against the doorframe as the words sank in. Helen hadn't just hidden her money, she had erased their future. Behind him, Mia's voice cracked in terror. "Aaron, the realtor's calling." He turned, dazed. "What realtor?" Mia held out her phone, the screen trembling in her grasp. A cheerful but firm voice spilled from the speaker. "Hi there, just following up. Per the instructions from Ms. Whitmore's legal representative, we've gone ahead and listed the property. Should be hitting the market this afternoon. Thanks for confirming earlier by default." Aaron's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Listed. Sold. Gone. He staggered back into the kitchen like a man shot in the chest. Mia followed, her rage finally combusting into raw sound. "You said she was slipping! You said she was too old to do anything!" Mia screamed, hurling a mug against the wall. It shattered like their plans. Aaron barely heard her. His ears were ringing. His entire body felt heavy, dragged down by a reality he hadn't wanted to see. From 1,000 miles away, tucked safely in her serene villa, Helen watched the house listing go live on her private tablet, front porch shining, roses blooming along the walkway. Newly listed, historic family home, available for immediate sale. Helen sipped her tea, savoring the citrus notes and cool ceramic in her hand. No anger, no regret, just a soft, satisfied peace. Meanwhile, back at the house, Mia collapsed face first onto their expensive white leather couch, punching the cushions and muffling a howl of defeat. Aaron sat frozen at the kitchen table, staring at the floor. In their arrogance, they had forgotten something Helen never did. Patience isn't always rewarded. Sometimes it's punished. Mia pressed her face deep into the pillow and screamed as the first notification pinged on her phone. Zillow listing. Available now. Priced to move fast. The silence around Mia grew louder with each passing day. One by one, her so-called friends evaporated, like mist under a cruel morning sun. The same women who once praised her designer shoes and flocked to her wine-soaked brunches now sent nothing but polite excuses, unread messages, and icy smiles from across parking lots. Mia scrolled through her phone, thumb trembling, staring at the group chat she'd once ruled like a queen. Not a single new message, no invites, no sympathy. It had taken less than a month for her empire of brunches and borrowed admiration to crumble. Aaron's resentment was a living, breathing thing now, coiling in the air between them. The fight started small, biting remarks about overspending, cold dinners eaten in silence. "You said we'd be set," Aaron snapped one night, slamming his fork down so hard it bounced off the chipped dinner plate. "I didn't know she was planning to screw us over," Mia hissed back, the word screw tasting bitter in her mouth. Aaron stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor with a shriek. "Maybe you should have spent less time picking curtains and more time reading fine print." Mia watched him stalk out of the kitchen, rage simmering under her skin. She opened Facebook, tapping furiously. She needed someone to blame, and she needed it loudly. With trembling fingers, she posted a rant, painting Helen as a cruel, senile old woman who had abandoned her grateful family out of pure spite. The post gathered a few likes, mostly from second-tier acquaintances, but the comments stung. Maybe there's more to the story? Sad how money brings out the worst in people. Didn't you just post about redoing her kitchen last year? Each passive-aggressive question was a slap. Mia threw her phone across the room, watching it skitter under the sagging couch. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, in a bright, sunlit villa by a private lake, Helen sat at her breakfast nook, a delicate porcelain teacup balanced in her hand. She read the headlines slowly, savoring every word. "Local woman reclaims independence after family betrayal." There were photos, too. The article had used an old image of Helen, smiling at a charity event, standing proudly with a plaque in her hands. She looked dignified, proud, untouchable. Helen set the tablet down, the corner of her mouth curving into a smile that tasted sweeter than any revenge fantasy could offer. Flashback. She heard Mia's voice again, so sharp, so smug, whispered across a festive dinner table. "She should start packing. She's almost done anyway." Helen sipped her tea. "Not quite done yet, dear." Back in the crumbling world Mia now inhabited, panic set in deeper. Bills were stacking like sandbags against a rising tide. The bank had begun calling about the pending foreclosure. Aaron was barely speaking to her. And now even the friendly realtor who had once gushed over Mia's design instincts had ghosted her. Desperation is a powerful solvent. It dissolved pride first. Late one night, with a bottle of cheap wine sweating on the counter beside her, Mia searched online for fast cash solutions. She found it, an ad too good to be true. Need money fast? No credit check? Instant approval? A payday lender, legalized theft wrapped in glossy words. Mia's fingers hovered over the Apply Now button. The page glowed at her like an invitation and a warning. She clicked anyway. She filled out the forms, heart hammering, lying about income, lying about collateral. All she needed was a little breathing room, she told herself. As she hit submit, she didn't notice the fine print. Failure to repay may result in wage garnishment, asset seizure, and legal action. But someone else would notice, very soon. Across the city, in a law office Helen had carefully engaged months ago, a monitoring alert pinged, Mia Whitmore attempted predatory loan registration. And Helen's lawyer? He was already preparing the next move. The smell of desperation lingered in Mia's living room like cheap perfume. Stacks of unopened mail towered on the entryway table. Late notices, foreclosure warnings, credit card statements, thick, heavy paper weighing down a life built on illusions. Mia drummed her chipped nails against her laptop, forcing herself to breathe. One last chance, she told herself. If she could just refinance, if she could just pull equity from the house Helen abandoned, maybe they could survive this. She clicked through yet another mortgage application, fingers flying over the keys. Income? Fabricated? Assets? Inflated? Debt? Omitted, like a sin whispered into a broken confessional. The Submit button glowed on her screen. With a shaky breath, Mia pressed it. Minutes ticked by, agonizing, endless, until a single notification flashed across her screen. Application denied. Reason: insufficient ownership rights. Mia's heart dropped into her stomach. No, she whispered, clicking through in disbelief. Page after page confirmed it. Without Helen's signature or ownership rights, the house wasn't hers to mortgage. Her fingers froze on the trackpad. Cold, paralyzing fear trickled down her spine. At the same moment, Aaron stood in the cluttered kitchen, flipping through bank statements he hadn't seen before. A sick realization settled over him as he read line after line of unfamiliar charges: boutique shopping sprees, luxury spa weekends, plane tickets for trips he'd never taken. "Mia!" he shouted, voice raw with disbelief. "What?" she snapped from the living room, eyes still glued to the rejection notice. "You opened 3 joint credit cards without telling me." He slammed the papers onto the counter, veins bulging in his neck. "I had to," Mia shouted back, face flushing. "I was trying to fix what your mother broke." Aaron's laugh was hollow, almost pitying. "You broke us long before she walked away." The front doorbell rang, sharp, merciless. Both of them startled like guilty children. Aaron snatched the envelope sticking out of the mailbox, tearing it open without thinking. The letter inside was thin, polite, devastating. Helen's lawyer had written it with a scalpel's precision. "Dear Ms. Whitmore, this formal letter serves as notice that any attempts to leverage, claim, or represent ownership over Mrs. Helen Parker's former residence or associated financial assets will be met with immediate legal action. Please govern yourself accordingly." At the bottom, in cold, neat type, the final line: "You are advised to seek personal legal counsel immediately." Mia crumpled onto the couch, the letter fluttering from her hands to the carpet like a white flag of surrender. The walls around them, once filled with laughter and plans for their future, now closed in like a coffin. Meanwhile, Helen sat beneath a striped patio umbrella at her lakeside villa, sipping a spritzer laced with fresh lime. Across the table, her lawyer Mr. Bennett smiled approvingly, tapping a leather-bound portfolio. "Power of attorney finalized," he said. "Estate protections airtight. They can't touch a dime now." Helen nodded, her silver hair catching the sun like a halo. "Good," she said quietly. "Let them chase ghosts." From the villa's terrace, she could hear the waves crashing against the dock below, a sound that had once symbolized loneliness, but now sang of freedom. Back at Aaron and Mia's collapsing world, the whispers started growing louder. Neighbors, old friends, the very people who once admired Mia's perfectly curated life now exchanged knowing glances over fences and grocery aisles. "Did you hear?" one woman muttered to another. "Lost everything. Turns out it was never hers to begin with." The social death Mia had once inflicted on others was now returning with interest. Mia paced the house like a trapped animal, checking her phone for messages that wouldn't come. Aaron drank in silence, resentment steeping deeper with every passing hour. And then it came. The true death knell. Another knock at the door. This time, a man in a neatly pressed suit handed them each a thick envelope. "Ms. Whitmore, Mr. Parker, you've been served." Mia ripped open the envelope with trembling hands, and the words blurred together in her panicked mind. But one sentence screamed loud and clear: "Court summons. Failure to vacate premises and attempted fraudulent claims." And Helen. Helen leaned back in her chair, raised her glass to the horizon, and whispered, "Checkmate." Some people watch courtroom dramas for entertainment. Aaron and Mia were about to live one, and they weren't the heroes. The courthouse smelled of old paper and fresh coffee. Murmurs floated through the air like restless ghosts, brushing past Aaron's stiff shoulders and Mia's trembling hands as they shuffled through the metal detectors. Everything felt sharper here: the fluorescent lights, the tapping heels of lawyers, the cutting stares of strangers. Inside courtroom 4B, Helen sat poised and calm, a navy blue blazer hugging her small frame, a soft silk scarf knotted neatly at her throat. Her eyes, sharp and steady, locked onto Mia and Aaron as they entered. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. Mia, on the other hand, clutched her designer handbag like a drowning woman grabbing a lifebuoy. Aaron kept his head down, jaw clenched so tightly a vein pulsed in his temple. The bailiff called the session to order, voice booming through the hushed room. Judge Holloway, a stern woman with steel-gray hair and unforgiving eyes, peered down from her high bench. "Case number 98,427, the clerk read aloud. "Petitioner, Mrs. Helen Parker. Respondents, Aaron Parker and Mia Whitmore." Helen's attorney, Mr. Bennett, rose first, his voice like smooth glass. "Your Honor, we will demonstrate today that my client's actions regarding her property and financial estate were legally sound, independently validated and protected under trust law. Any claims of incapacity or impropriety will be countered with documented evidence." Mia's lawyer, a nervous man clearly regretting taking this case, cleared his throat. "Your Honor, we contend that Mrs. Parker was unduly influenced, or perhaps not fully cognizant of her actions at the time of these transfers." Helen lifted a single eyebrow, her expression politely skeptical. Mr. Bennett smiled like a shark who smelled blood. "With the court's permission," he said smoothly, "we would like to submit Exhibits A through F, recent mental competency evaluations, independent trust certification, witness affidavits from Helen's physician, financial advisor, and estate planner." Judge Holloway nodded curtly. "Admitted." Mia squirmed in her seat. But Mr. Bennett wasn't finished. "And," he added, a gleam in his eye, "we would like to introduce a digital recording, taken legally, of Ms. Whitmore's behavior toward Mrs. Parker." Mia's face blanched. The courtroom speakers crackled, and then Mia's own voice filled the chamber. "She's old and confused. We'll let her think she's in charge a little longer. By next year it'll be our house anyway." A collective gasp rose from the spectators. Aaron's face turned beet red. Mia visibly shrank into her chair, her hand fluttering to her mouth too late. Judge Holloway's gavel came down once, hard. "Enough." She leaned forward, voice low and dangerous. "Mrs. Parker's documentation is flawless. Her cognitive capacity is unimpeached. Her actions are fully within her rights. As for the respondents, this court finds your claims baseless and frivolous. Mrs. Parker owes you nothing." Helen didn't smile. She didn't need to. The silence was satisfaction enough. Mia burst into tears, loud and uncontrolled, mascara streaking down her cheeks in ugly black rivers. Judge Holloway ignored her completely. "Court is adjourned." The gavel struck once more, sealing their defeat. Outside the courthouse, news vans had already gathered, journalists buzzing like bees scenting scandal. Flashes popped as Helen exited with her attorney, walking slowly but proudly, like a queen leaving a battlefield victorious. Aaron and Mia trailed behind, the cameras capturing every shameful second. Within hours, headlines exploded across social media. Senior citizen outsmarts greedy heirs, wins freedom and fortune. The grandmother who outsmarted them all. Mia tried shielding her face from the cameras, but it was too late. Her fall from grace was public, irreversible. That night, in their now half-empty rental, Aaron sat silently on the threadbare couch while Mia sobbed into her hands. Something in him cracked. Slowly, methodically, Aaron packed a single duffel bag. Mia looked up, red-eyed and confused. "Where are you going?" Aaron zipped the bag closed. "Anywhere you're not," he said coldly. "I lost my mother because of you. I'm not losing what's left of me." The door slammed behind him with a finality that left Mia gasping. Across town, Aaron sat in a grimy diner, his hands trembling as he signed the separation papers. Helen's plan had been more than legal defense. It had been liberation, and not just for herself. It wasn't the door slamming that marked the end. It was the quiet way it drifted shut. No arguments, no second chances, no looking back. Aaron walked out of the rental house carrying nothing but a duffel bag and a weight in his chest that no luggage could hold. The stale scent of unspoken blame clung to him as he stepped into the chilly night. Behind him, Mia's sobs echoed through the thin, cracked walls. Raw, pitiful, too late. He didn't turn around. At the diner across town, the fluorescent lights buzzed low and tired as Aaron signed the temporary lease paperwork handed to him by an old coworker. A room over a garage, a mattress on the floor, a mini-fridge that whined like a kicked dog. Aaron stared at the single sad lamp by the bedside. In his mind, he saw Helen's house again, the polished floors, the garden she once tended with gloved hands, the warm kitchen smells of homemade stew. A pang of regret coiled deep in his gut. Meanwhile, Mia's spiral continued at breathtaking speed. Social media turned cruel in a flash, the same friends who once begged for invites now tossing cold, mocking comments under news articles. Gold diggers eventually find dirt, don't they? Guess karma showed up with receipts. Mia tried to fight back, posting long rants about Helen's cruelty, her betrayal, her manipulation. But the tide had turned. Nobody was interested in pitying a woman who had once whispered death wishes behind an old woman's back. Helen, sipping chamomile tea on her villa porch miles away, scrolled past the drama without reaction. The headlines were just noise now, fading echoes behind her. Her focus was elsewhere. At a heavy oak desk, Helen carefully reviewed her will one last time. No family inheritances, no second chances. Instead, scholarships for underprivileged youth, endowments to elder abuse nonprofits, anonymous donations to women's shelters. Every signature she inked was a stone laid on a bridge she was building, not for those who hurt her, but for those still trying to survive people like them. Her hand trembled slightly as she signed the final page, not from regret, from the sheer magnitude of relief. As she sealed the documents in a thick manila envelope, a small photo frame caught her eye. It was Aaron, age 5, missing a front tooth, arms thrown around her neck in pure, childish love. "I'll always take care of you, Mommy." The words echoed in her mind, so fresh, so bright, and so heartbreakingly distant now. Helen's breath hitched. For a moment, her fingers hovered over the frame, aching to rewind time. But then she closed her eyes and let the moment pass like a wave washing over a stubborn rock. She wiped the tear that dared to fall with the back of her hand. Then, with deliberate gentleness, she placed the photo back down. Face down. It was the kindest goodbye she would ever offer. Across town, the morning sun found Mia curled on a threadbare couch, laptop open in front of her. A fresh ping announced a new email. She clicked, bleary-eyed. Notice of eviction. Her lease was officially terminated. No extensions, no negotiations. The words blurred together as panic clawed at her chest. Helen's signature was nowhere on the notice. It didn't have to be. Her absence echoed louder than any pen stroke. Mia crumpled the eviction letter in shaking fists, then caught sight of herself in the mirror across the room. A stranger stared back, tired, desperate, and utterly defeated. And for the first time, Mia understood. Some doors don't slam shut. They just drift closed. Forever. It wasn't the moving trucks or the slammed doors that haunted Mia. It was the silence, the way the house, once buzzing with false entitlement, now stood still and indifferent as she was ordered to leave. The eviction notice hadn't been a threat, it had been a promise. Boxes were stacked hastily in the front yard, their sides buckling from the cheap tape she barely bothered to use. The early morning air stung her nose, thick with the heavy scent of dying winter grass and the bitter taste of failure. Neighbors pretended not to watch from behind their curtains. A few had the nerve to step outside, arms crossed, faces smug. Mia staggered down the porch steps, dragging a suitcase that wobbled on one broken wheel. She shot a venomous look at the house she once boasted would be hers soon enough. Now it wasn't just lost. It was being given away. A month later, the house was sold at public auction. Not for inheritance, not for family, for something bigger, colder, and infinitely more righteous. Helen sat in her sunny villa, paperwork spread neatly across her kitchen table. The proceeds of the sale, every hard-earned dollar, was being routed into 4 carefully chosen elder abuse charities. Foundations that built shelters, ran hotlines, funded pro bono legal defenses. It wasn't revenge. It was restitution. A hand reaching back for those who hadn't found a way to fight yet. Helen dipped her pen in blue ink, the final flourish sealing the transaction. As she signed the last form, sunlight spilled across the polished wood, warming her skin like an old friend. She exhaled slowly, deeply. This wasn't anger anymore. It was peace, poured into action. Meanwhile, Aaron floundered alone. Without Helen's quiet support, debts piled up like junk mail on a forgotten doorstep. He faced court summons, collection agencies, whispered office gossip. He had been a man who thought patience would inherit wealth. Instead, it left him bankrupt, morally, financially, spiritually. Helen's name rarely crossed his lips now. When it did, it tasted like regret and dust. In town, whispers about Helen's grace and quiet strength grew louder. Not the scandal Mia had tried to spark, not the greedy villain they'd hoped to paint her as, but a woman who had survived cruelty without losing her dignity. Local newspapers even ran a small feature, "Widow Turns Betrayal into Philanthropy, How Helen R. Built a Legacy." Helen smiled softly when she saw the clipping, folded it neatly, and placed it in a drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. That afternoon, Helen unlocked the doors of the old community center. It smelled like lemon polish and fresh canvas. She set out paintbrushes, jars of water, bright paper palettes. Her hands moved easily, joyfully, arranging easels and rolling up her sleeves. The first class was free. No registrations, no questions, just art and breath and second chances. A few elderly women shuffled in, shy at first. Then more followed, smiling, laughing, asking if they needed to bring their own supplies. Helen waved it all away with a twinkle in her eye. "Just bring yourself, that's the masterpiece." As she taught shading and color blending under the soft afternoon light, Helen felt something open wide inside her, a bright, endless sky where bitterness once lived. Later that night, Helen returned to her villa, barefoot, paint still streaked along her forearms. She found a letter shoved under her door. No stamp, no return address. Her fingers hovered for a moment. The paper trembled slightly as she unfolded it. The handwriting was messy, rushed, but unmistakable. Mia. The first line hit like a cold slap. "I'm sorry." Helen stared at the letter, heart thudding once, twice. Would she open the old wound again, or seal it for good? Some letters carry the weight of redemption. Others carry the ashes of bridges already burned. Helen sat at her kitchen table, the letter spread before her like a wound someone else had finally noticed. The villa was quiet except for the soft tick-tick-tick of the old wall clock, measuring each second of her hesitation. The words were desperate, scrawled, uneven, begging. "I was wrong. I miss you. We need you. Please forgive me." Mia's handwriting, once sharp and commanding, looked almost childlike now, the ink smudged where tears had likely fallen. Helen ran her thumb along the edge of the paper, feeling the ridges of pressure, the uneven drag of panic. A part of her, buried so deep it barely had a voice anymore, whispered, "They finally understand." But a louder part, the one forged from years of overlooked sacrifices and private heartbreaks, stayed silent. Helen leaned back, letting the memories come, uninvited but unstoppable. Flashback. Mia laughing at the brunch table, casually cruel. Aaron looking away when Helen needed his defense most. The secret meetings about selling her house, as if she were already gone. Flashback. The Christmas Eve when Mia clinked glasses, talking about taking over soon, while Helen smiled tightly, planning her silent exit. The way they had cut her out of decisions, out of holidays, out of her own life, one thoughtless choice at a time. Flashback. Helen selling her wedding jewelry so Aaron could pay his tuition, believing sacrifice would be its own reward, only to find that gratitude had an expiration date. Helen folded the letter slowly, methodically. Each crease felt final, not angry, not even bitter anymore, simply final. She stood, her knees cracking softly, and crossed the warm terracotta tile floor to the fireplace. The villa smelled faintly of sea salt and old wood, the windows open to a tender breeze. Helen knelt before the hearth. She struck a match, its sulfur tang sharp in the air, and touched it to the corner of the letter. The flame caught greedily, curling the paper into blackened lace before devouring it whole. Helen watched without blinking until nothing remained but a few soft flakes of ash. Not every apology deserved an audience. Some stories were better left untold, unanswered, uninvited back into the room. She wiped her hands on her jeans, standing straighter than she had in years. The heavy burden of old hopes, the ones that clung stubbornly to the idea of family loyalty, lifted off her chest, drifting away like the smoke rising into the chimney. She wasn't angry, she wasn't sad, she was free. As Helen poured herself a glass of lemon water, the phone buzzed on the counter. A simple notification, one she almost ignored. But something about it made her pause. From her lawyer. "Big news. You've been formally invited to keynote at the National Elder Empowerment Summit. Congratulations. They want your story." Helen's breath caught in her throat. Her story. Not the one Mia tried to rewrite, not the one Aaron abandoned, but hers. She set the glass down carefully, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from something far more electric. Purpose. Helen stared out the window at the ocean beyond her villa, the horizon blurring into golds and blues as the sun began its slow, triumphant descent. The air tasted like promise, like the kind of beginning you earned after surviving your own ending. A slight, knowing smile tugged at the corner of her lips. Let them whisper. Let them regret. She was finally speaking in a room where her voice would not just be heard, it would be remembered. Helen's fingers hovered above the RSVP button on her phone, and this time, she didn't hesitate. The stage lights warmed Helen's skin, but it was not the heat that made her heart pound. It was the hundreds of faces staring up at her, waiting, hoping, waiting to hear the story she once thought no one would ever care about. She adjusted the microphone, the soft whir of its stand slicing the silence. "They tried to bury me," she said, her voice steady, clear, powerful. "But they didn't realize I was the seed." A murmur ran through the auditorium like a ripple across still water. Helen paused, letting the words sink deep. She could almost hear the collective breath being held. She spoke of betrayal, the quiet kind that doesn't leave bruises but carves into the heart. She spoke of resilience, the kind you forge in lonely rooms when no one is watching. She spoke of dignity, the fierce, unapologetic reclaiming of it, one step, one choice at a time. As she spoke, the air changed. Some audience members leaned forward, blinking back tears. Others sat rigid, fists clenched, as if reliving wounds of their own. Helen told them about the villa she had built, not just from bricks and savings, but from pride, about the financial traps she'd seen coming, how she had chosen strategy over bitterness, about how survival sometimes meant walking away without a backward glance, and all the while the faces in the crowd transformed, not pitying, not patronizing, but reverent. Flashback. A warm summer evening. Her husband, Thomas, sitting on the porch swing, his hand warm over hers. His voice low but certain. "Don't ever let them make you small, Helen. Not even the ones you love most." She carried those words into battle, and now, into this victory. Helen finished her speech with a soft smile, one that reached all the way into her bones. "We are not burdens. We are not stepping stones. We are not done." Silence. Then, like a breaking wave, the room erupted into applause. It wasn't polite clapping. It was the kind that cracked the walls, that echoed into memory. Helen blinked against the sting in her eyes as people stood, one by one, until the whole hall rose around her, a standing ovation, not for what she lost, but for what she became. Afterward, the chaos swirled. Reporters, volunteers, strangers pressing into her space, wanting a piece of the strength she'd poured onto that stage. The scent of fresh flowers floated from bouquets being thrust into her hands. Cameras flashed, microphones hovered like bees. One woman, her voice trembling, said, "You made me believe my story isn't over either." Helen hugged her, feeling the rawness of shared survival between them. In the green room, as she wiped her face and sipped lukewarm water, her phone buzzed. Aaron. The message was simple, just a link. Curious, Helen clicked. A video. The speech replaying from a shaky phone recording, already viral, already shared by thousands. And there, at the bottom, a comment. Aaron Thomas. "I never knew how strong you really were. I'm sorry, Mom." Helen stared at the screen. The ache of what could have been tried to tug at her, but she smiled, setting the phone face down. Some things didn't need a reply. Some lessons taught themselves, with time. As she rose to gather her things, a sharp knock sounded on the dressing room door. A woman in a tailored blazer entered, holding a crisp leather folder. "Helen? I'm with Beacon Publishing," she said, extending a hand. "We think your story could help millions. Would you consider writing a memoir?" Helen's breath caught. Not just surviving. Legacy. Helen's hand hovered over the offered contract, smiling softly, knowing she was about to write her ending, her way. The pen hovered for a moment above the page, trembling not from weakness, but from the quiet weight of what it meant. Helen exhaled slowly, the late afternoon light spilling through the window, gilding her hair in soft gold. Title, Almost Done Anyway. She smiled at the irony, at how close they had come to being right, and how spectacularly wrong they had turned out to be. The memoir wasn't angry. It wasn't even sad. It was truth. Truth written with the steady, unshaking hand of a woman who had lived, who had lost, who had refused to vanish quietly into the background others tried to paint for her. Outside, the lake shimmered like melted glass, the air laced with the scent of fresh rain on warm stone. Helen closed the leather-bound journal softly and stood, joints creaking a little but spirit unbent. The wood of the floor was cool beneath her bare feet as she moved through the villa she had chosen, not inherited, not begged for, but earned. Everywhere she looked, there were pieces of herself. A sunlit corner stacked with watercolor paints, a windowsill lined with tiny clay figures sculpted with laughing students from her free art classes, shelves of books worn at the edges from constant use, constant dreaming. Each morning she painted. Each afternoon she taught. Each evening she watched the sun sink into the endless blue horizon with a piece she'd once thought would never be hers again. And never, not once, did she check her phone for messages that didn't come. Never once did she wonder if the silence from Aaron meant regret or just more selfishness. It didn't matter anymore. Flashback, Helen on her knees, scrubbing floors after her husband's funeral because bills didn't mourn. Helen pawning her grandmother's ring to cover Aaron's tuition. Helen sitting alone on Christmas nights while something more important always called them away. She had given her heart until it was threadbare. She had asked for nothing but respect, and even that had been treated as too much. And yet, here she stood, not broken, not bitter, brilliant, whole. A light knock at the door. Helen turned, the wooden floor whispering under her steps. Standing there was a courier, smiling shyly, holding a slim, cream-colored envelope. "Publishing contract, ma'am," he said. "Congratulations." Helen accepted it with a nod, the paper smooth and warm from the courier's hands. "Thank you," she murmured, almost to herself. The door closed with a soft click. The world fell silent again, perfectly, beautifully silent. Helen walked to the patio, her bones slow but sure, and settled into the wicker chair that overlooked the lake. The sun had just started its slow descent, streaking the sky in molten orange and bruised purple. The breeze kissed her cheek. The air smelled of salt and pine. Somewhere distant, children laughed, sharp and clear as wind chimes. Helen opened the contract, scanning the first page, feeling no fear, no hesitation, only a steady, thundering certainty. She wasn't writing this for Aaron, not for Mia, not even for the world. She was writing it for the woman they tried to erase, and who had instead carved herself into stone. She picked up her pen again, signed with a steady hand, and tucked the contract neatly into her desk drawer. The horizon called to her, wide and wild. She stood barefoot on the cool wooden deck, toes gripping the earth she had reclaimed for herself. The lake roared softly in the gathering twilight, and Helen smiled. Not a polite smile, not a careful one. A smile that stretched deep into her bones, a smile that had waited a lifetime. Above her, the first stars dared to blink awake, and Helen whispered, half to the lake, half to the setting sun. They whispered that I was almost done. Turns out I was just getting started. And for once, time bowed to her.